probably no fewer than 100 letters to different publishing houses and agencies, and I'd bought all these books on how to publish a book, and I had gone through all the traditional routes, and it was getting me nowhere. And then I was at this luncheon about 2 years ago, and I sat next to this man who had a copy of a book in front of him. And I said, oh, what's that book? And he said, oh, I just self-published this book. It's a memoir. We adopted a child. They adopted a child from the reservation who had Down syndrome. And so they wrote a book about adopting a child with special needs, and they also wrote the book to talk about adopting cross-culturally. And I said, well, what was the process like self-publishing? And he said, oh, I got it figured out. It took me a couple years, but I got it figured out. You want to have lunch sometime? I'll talk you through it. So we had lunch. I took 2 pages of notes. I did a little bit of research on my own to make sure that the company he went through was legit. And then I just followed his notes. And it hasn't been, I mean, I had a lot of extra help. Getting the cover designed, one of my blog friends, Colleen Mulligan, is an artist in St. Louis. She designed this for me as a gift. And I just think it's such a stunning cover. And it was not an easy process because getting the material to the publishing company is a huge pain in the butt. I mean, they have very specific regulations on how they want things. And if you call them and say, well, can you help me with this? They say, no. And they hang up. You know our rules. We'll send you our rules again. And so we did that for about a year, where I was finally like, I'm not going to be able to charm them. I actually thought about like sending them donuts or cookies or something, and then I realized that I was getting nowhere with them anytime soon. So I think that the trickiest part was getting the material to them exactly the way they wanted. But once you do that and you give them a credit card, books just start arriving. It's amazing. And they start arriving with major errors because nobody at that company cares what they look like. They got their money for printing the book. So you really have to be your own best advocate. Did I answer your question? Oh, and marketing. Okay, so marketing, have a little blog, and I have lots of people who have been very kind to say that they want to promote it. So I put it on the blog. People are buying it through other retailers and locally, hopefully. And I put up a contest and said, if you can come up with a creative way that I should market my blog, I will send out 5 copies. And I got like 80 comments to that with all kinds of different ideas, including create a Facebook page and make it, get fans of your Facebook page and read some of it, put it on YouTube and get people to hear you reading it on YouTube. And I got a lot of lists of teeny tiny bookstores all over the country who may be interested in having a couple copies on consignment. So I want to go through and make the changes that I've noted in this copy, and then I'm just going to be contacting them. And I figure I'm going to write a nice handwritten note and see if they want a couple copies. I can't afford to send all of them a copy, but I'm just going to go at it little by little. So. And hopefully, the idea with going with the company I went with, it's called Lightning Source, is that they're owned by Ingram Publishing, which is one of the giants. And so they watch your numbers. And the idea is that if you sell, if they're publishing a ton for you, if they're printing them and sending them all over the place, eventually they wiggle you in. So hopefully Basket Baby will be published under a publishing house, and I won't be sending out free copies to blog readers. Although I'd probably still do that. So. Yeah. Julianne.
I was interested with Mika and her relationship sort of with the village women. It seemed like she was being punished for her husband's transgressions, but then, that it just seemed to be this very, not a very nice climate in the village. And I mean, did you actually have experience with that?
Yeah, I did. I will say one of the, so when I was working for Esperanza as a public health worker, one of my jobs when I would travel to our project sites is I would walk the project for probably about a week. Especially in Mozambique. So one of the times I was with a visiting doctor who was an American, we were walking hut to hut, and we were talking to different families and making sure they were sleeping under the mosquito nets, and that they were boiling their water to prevent cholera, and that their children weren't malnourished, and that things just looked right, because it's called a windshield survey in public health. You want to, usually a windshield survey, you're driving a car, but in this case we were hoofing it. But we came upon a woman once upon a time where she was sitting outside on this reed mat, and she had two infants at her feet. One was a newborn and one was less than 2 years old, and she had a couple older children who were obviously fending for themselves, and they were really, really malnourished. And when African children get malnourished, they get this disease called kwashiorkor, which is where their hair turns red. And you may have seen that in photos from National Geographic or in the news. Kwashiorkor is a sign of extreme malnourishment in African children in particular. And this woman was sitting there, and she was getting kwashiorkor, and her children were getting kwashiorkor, and you could tell, I mean, her cheekbones were sunken, and she was having a hard time concentrating, and she was just a mess. And we asked her, what's happened? And her husband, the family had broken down, and her husband had come and gone, and she had the sickness. So in Mozambique, they don't address HIV because they're very superstitious and they don't want to talk about having the disease, because if you talk about it, then you could give it to someone else. And so she had the sickness, and she didn't know what she was going to do with her children. And here's a woman sitting within eyesight of 5 other huts with 2 babies in her lap, obviously starving to death, and close to the ends of HIV, and there was not a soul around her who was going to step in and do anything about it. And that's not because Mozambicans are heartless people. They are very wonderful people. It's that they're terrified that by helping that neighbor, somehow they're going to get the disease themselves. And so, the stigma of HIV is very alive, and I tried to kind of capture a little bit of that in Mika's struggle, and that there was nobody willing to go forward and help her. Phil.
Kind of leads in the question I was thinking of. You mentioned specifically that, like, the 2 main characters have major aspects of yourself in them. Are there any other specific characters in there that you've modeled after specific people that you met while you were there?
Yes, and I will not tell you who. I'm not going to lie, there are definitely people I've met, and I'm like, you are going to be a great villain. I am running details down right now. Keep talking. Yeah, I think some of the characters in this book, I think the hardest part of being a new novelist and trying to get something out like this is developing voice. And I think developing voice is a huge hurdle for any writer, because you want the people to sound unique, and yet you don't want them to all have a twang. You don't want them to all sound like absurd characters from different cultures that have all kind of come together. And so, I think especially like the people that she deals with here in the Valley are all people in one way or another I know. And for those of you who knew me in high school, I worked at Rosita's, which was on Dobson and Guadalupe for many, many years. And there is a scene in this book that is essentially Rosita's, which I'm very glad the owners of Rosita's are not here to hear that, because it's not very flattering.